Hey everyone, welcome back. Before we get started today, I wanted to quickly mention that I started a new YouTube channel called Crafty and Curious. This is a place where I'm going to be exploring all of my love of creativity and crafts. Lots of knitting tutorials are going to be over there, yarn hauls. I'm also going to be collaborating with my friend Sarah, so she's going to be bringing a bunch of crochet content over to that channel. But we've got a few videos up right now, so if you are interested in knitting, crochet, and just crafts and creativity in general, go ahead and check out the link in the description below to the Crafty and Curious YouTube channel. With that being said, I'm going to get into this video talking about different books I've read about North Korea. So in and around November of 2020, I was going through a really stressful time in my life, and I found that I really needed a distraction. And as one does in stressful times, I decided that an effective distraction would be learning something new. So I threw myself into YouTube and I decided to learn all about North Korea. Now, this all started when I started watching the YouTuber Yeonmi Park. She has a channel here that I'll link down below called Yeonmi Park, Voice of North Korea, and that's really what got me interested in learning more about what's going on over there. After discovering her channel, I started watching all of the documentaries that were available on YouTube and Netflix and Amazon Prime, and once I exhausted that list, I realized that I needed another avenue to learn about North Korea through. And of course, books were the next logical step, specifically audiobooks. What had started as a need for a distraction in these trying times quickly turned into a real interest, and for good reason. North Korea is a fascinating place to learn about. Now, in this video, I'm not going to go into the history of the Korean War and how North Korea came to be. There's plenty of different resources here on YouTube and elsewhere on the internets that you can go and learn about the Korean War. But what I am going to do is I'm going to talk about the 4 audiobooks that I listened to that center around the idea of what North Korea is and what the experience of the North Korean people has been. Make sure that you do stick around until the end because I'm going to be mentioning a whole bunch of other books about North Korea that I want to get to reading, and I'd love to hear your opinions on it. Before we get too far into things, I do want to give a couple of disclaimers. The first is that I am not an expert on this subject. I've simply read a few books or listened to a few books on the subject, and I want to share my thoughts on those books. The other disclaimer that I have is that if you go into, say, Goodreads or Amazon and you look at the reviews, sometimes you'll find people criticizing the authors of these books, who often are North Korean defectors themselves. People will be criticizing these individuals, saying that their stories are fake or that they're lying in some way or embellishing their stories. I'm not going to be touching on that at all today. I don't think that I'm in a position to say that somebody is or isn't telling the truth. I'm going to take these stories at face value and I'm going to discuss them from that perspective. The only other thing I wanted to mention is that there is a lot of content in these books that could be very triggering for some people. There is mention of torture, physical, sexual abuse, human trafficking, and all sorts of topics that could make some people uncomfortable, so I just wanted to give that trigger warning before we move forward into talking about the first book. So with that being said, buckle in, we're going to talk about 4 books about North Korea. So the first book I'm going to talk about is In Order to Live by Yeonmi Park. Yeonmi Park is a YouTuber here. She also is a North Korean defector and human rights activist. She's very, very active in speaking about the injustices going on in North Korea up until this day. And in her book, In Order to Live, she talks about her story of defecting from North Korea with her mother when she was 13 years old. They crossed over a river from North Korea into China and had to basically survive undercover in China for a while before making her way to Mongolia, across the Gobi Desert, and eventually on towards freedom. Now, they had to get to Mongolia because unfortunately China is somewhat of a sympathizer with North Korea, and China will send North Korean defectors back to North Korea to be sent to prison camp, to be tortured, to be killed, etc. So they had to make their way through China all the way to Mongolia to then seek asylum. Now, this book is told in first person, and something that I really liked about it is that it was very accessible. So I feel like this is a book that anybody could pick up and really I mean, it's pretty sad, so maybe not enjoy, but they could really get a lot out of it, even if you have no prior knowledge of North Korea. Now, the really interesting thing about these books, as I go on to talk about the rest of them, is that each book written by a defector or written about a defector is incredibly different. So there are some shared experiences across the board, but generally speaking, the manner in which someone defects from North Korea varies completely in ease and time frame based on their wealth, their connections, their social status, etc., etc. So the next book that I'm going to talk about is told from a very, very different perspective. So the next book that I listened to about North Korea was Escape from Camp 14 by Blaine Harden. Now, this book followed a slightly different format from the first one. This was more of a biography rather than an autobiography, and it was based on a series of interviews that Blaine Harden, the author, had with an individual named Shin Dong-hyuk. I hope I said that correctly. And it was based on sort of this individual's experiences defecting from North Korea. Now, the remarkable thing about this story is that Shin Dong-hyuk was actually born in a prison camp in North Korea. So if you don't know, North Korea has a series of political prison camps where individuals go to essentially be slaves and to be tortured. And these are individuals who defy the Kim dynasty or the Kim family in North Korea. Now, there's been different numbers thrown around in different documentaries and books and things, but it's said that there might be as many as 120,000 individuals in these prison camps in North Korea, which for an overall country population of 25 million is a lot of people in prison camps. Now, you might think that somebody who is born in one of these political prison camps would be removed and maybe sent to an orphanage, given kind of a second chance at life, but that's not the case in North Korea. If you are someone who happens to be born to parents in this political prison camp, you are considered offspring of the worst, and you are treated as nothing. So for those that are born in these prison camps, you're kind of considered the lowest of the low. You're considered unworthy because of your tarnished bloodline, and you basically don't even get to learn about your own country. You're not worthy of knowing about the Kim regime or North Korea as a whole, let alone the world outside of North Korea. Basically, their entire life is this prison camp and nothing more. So this book is really interesting in that it goes through this first-hand account of somebody who grew up in one of these prison camps and then escaped from this prison camp. Not only out of the camp and into North Korea, but out of North Korea and into the rest of the world. So the third book that I listened to about North Korea is called Nothing to Envy, and that is by Barbara DeMike, I'm not sure how to say that name. So this book was sort of like a biography, sort of like a history lesson, all rolled into one. I really, really liked that. This might have been my favorite out of the 4 audiobooks that I listened to. So in this book, we follow a few different defectors and their journey to freedom, as well as go into a bit of a deep dive on the history of North Korea, how it came to be, and why it is the way that it is today. It was really interesting to have one author talk about multiple defectors' stories, and it was really interesting to kind of compare and contrast in one book how different defectors' stories went based on where they came from, what their social status was, and what their resources were when they were leaving. I wouldn't say that this book was necessarily as guttural or intense of an experience as some of the other books about defectors leaving North Korea, just because it was kind of like a zoomed out look at North Korea and defectors' stories. But I did find that the author was fantastic at relating the different defectors' stories to one another and kind of weaving in just enough information to give us an overall look at what's going on in North Korea. So I think if you feel you might be uncomfortable reading or listening to a book about a very personal experience, I know that sometimes those one-on-one experiences where someone is telling their story can be really emotional for some people. If you want to learn about North Korea and learn about the struggles and the history of what's going on over there, this is a really good place to start. So the last book I'm going to talk about is The Girl with 7 Names by Hyun-Sia Lee. I hope I said that correctly. This book was basically a return to that first-person autobiography style of book, and in this instance we get a look at our author's struggle to defect while also trying to keep her family safe. Now this one is a really interesting account because in this instance, Hyunseol didn't actually want to defect permanently. She wanted to cross the river and cross the border into China just to experience China before she turned 18. But while she was there, she got word that it was no longer safe to return home. As Hyunseol goes through this journey to go from North Korea eventually to South Korea through many different countries, there are some really awe-inspiring instances of altruism that are discussed in this book, and after reading so many books about North Korea and learning all of this horrible, torturous, nasty history and things that are going on to this day, just complete human rights violations going on in North Korea, it was kind of a little bit of a breath of fresh air to hear that in her journey from essentially being a prisoner to being free, there were instances where kind of the human spirit shone through and there was positivity in the world. You might be wondering what kind of altruism I'm talking about here, and you're gonna have to read the book to find that out. So those are the 4 books about North Korea that I have read recently. Let me know in the comments below if there are other books that you recommend on the same subject. I've also got a list here of some books that I've looked into about North Korea that I do want to pick up at some point, so let me know as I read these off if you recommend any of these over each other. So first one I'm looking at is North Korea Confidential by Daniel Tudor, North Korea's Hidden Revolution by Yeonmi, I think, A River in Darkness by Masaji Ishikawa, Dear Leader by Jang Jin-sung, and The Impossible State by Victor Cha. So let me know your thoughts on any of these books. If you've read them before, if there's one that you recommend above the others, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. With that being said, I just want to say thank you so much for watching, to like and subscribe for future videos if this is your kind of thing, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!